Hello, and welcome to Comics X Games 2021. I'm Len, the Executive Director of Hand-Eye Society, an arts and video game organization that focuses on serving the game curious. We're located in Toronto, the place in the water where the trees are standing, and occupy the traditional territories of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. Toronto is now home to many other Indigenous peoples, as well as both welcome and unwelcomed guests. Comics X Games is a celebration not only of video games and comics, but also the intersections and cross-collaborations of different artists, developers, and creators in between. We're so excited to announce 5 games that were made in collaboration between games and comics artists for our Comics X Game Jam. Bell Book Subscribe, B-Sides, The Faceless City, Farewell Format, and Miss You Love. Check them out alongside the exhibitors throughout the week. Thank you so much for joining us for this event. I want to thank everyone who's been involved in the project over the past 5 months, as well as our fantastic moderators and volunteers. You can learn more about Hand-Eye Society by following us on Twitter at Hand-Eye Society, as well as subscribing to our newsletter. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope you enjoy the show, and I'll see you at the end of it.
Welcome, everybody. My name is Amanda Wong, and I am the Director of Partnerships and Fund Development at the Hand-Eye Society. I would like to thank Ontario Creates for making Comics X Games a reality, especially for the support in making our event online amidst this pandemic. I'd also like to thank our studio sponsors for contributing to the return of the Comics X Games Jam this year. Viewers will have a chance to see what some of these studios have been up to throughout the stream. Please go check out Clever Endeavor, Phantom Compass, Flowweaver, and Laundry Bear Games when you have a chance. Lastly, I want to give our team a huge shout out for making Comics X Games happen online, along with the support of our volunteers and volunteer coordinators, Anna Kim and Sam Cuddy. Please enjoy the stream.
Hey everyone, I'm Jordan Sparks, Director of Technology at the Hand-Eye Society and Production Coordinator of the online platform that currently hosts TCAF, Canzine, and Comics X Games for this online super festival. Thank you for coming to this online event that my colleagues and I spent so much time putting together. I won't take up too much more of your time, but we'll be running Comics X Games events featuring many speakers and games every day this week. Be sure to follow us on Twitch to be alerted when we go live, and you can find out more about the Hand-Eye Society at handeyeSociety.com. You can also attend this online festival at the link below, which is brokenpencil.com/TCAF, to see TCAF, Canzine, and Comics X Games exhibitors and jammers. Don't forget that this event goes from May 8th to May 15th, so keep an eye on us. A huge thank you to everybody who's been involved in this project, including our participants, our team, and our sponsors. As well, thank you for being our supporters. I'd also like to give a huge shout out to my team, including Len Predko, Brendan Lehman, Amanda Wong, Royale Edwards, Aaron Demeter, Phil Slyhoff, and Jillian Bleckenhorst, who all played a part in making this possible. Well, that's enough for me. Let's get our game on, and I hope you enjoy Comics X Games.
Hi, everyone. It's so great to be able to talk to you. Um, it's digital, it's not live, but we're getting used to that, I think. My name is Yeditja Julia Nomen. I am from Amsterdam originally, working most often in Europe and currently in France. And I will be giving a talk to you on how comics help me do my narrative work for games. I hope you enjoy listening to my experience. Maybe it helps you in your work as a writer or narrative designer in games, or maybe you are just interested in the subject and, well, learn something anyway. Um, I really want to thank the organization for having me. And I do hope that I get to meet some of you, well, virtually during the whole weekend and online somewhere, and hopefully in the future live again in Canada or somewhere else. Okay, so let me share my screen for you. And this is what we're talking about: words without audio, or how I learned to write for video games through comics. Yeah, well, that title, I guess, says it all. Um, Let me start by telling you a bit more about my personal background, because I think that is relevant to know, and relevant to realize why, for me, it was so important to use comics when I started writing for video games. Um, this is about me. As said, I'm a writer, a narrative designer, and also a director. I started out in film, TV, and theater. So basically, I went to theater school with a major in writing for performance, as it's called. So I learned to write scripts, mainly for film and TV, and for theater, a bit for radio. But from the get-go, this was all about writing dialogue and monologues for actors. So that's really important to realize. That's what I started out doing. And after I did my training, I went into film, TV, and theater. I started doing direction as well, assistant directing, also directing my own plays, um, always working with actors or working for actors. Um, Eventually, after several years, I did more interactive theater. And from interactive theater, I got interested in game development. I had always been a gamer just as a consumer. Um, Never really realized that that was obviously also a career path. So I started pursuing that. I like the interactive part. I like the puzzle and design part. Long story short, over the last couple of years, I've been mainly working for video games. I also still do interactive theater and film stuff, but interactivity is the main part of that. And I've been lucky enough to have worked on multiple games. I've got quite a bit of shipped games, a couple of them in mobile, some on PC. And the ones mentioned here are the ones that I will also be discussing during this lecture. One of them, Old Frequencies, is a mobile and PC game, indie game from a French studio called Accidental Queens, which is a really specific game because it's audio only. So full of actors again, talking all the way through. It's also a game that is especially playable for people with visual impairments. Another title is Criminal Minds, the mobile game. You see the image from that as well, which is a mobile game based on the CBS hit series. That one has no audio, or at least, well, it has music and sound effects, but no spoken language. But that was interesting because you know the characters from the TV series, so you sort of hear them in your head. And then the last one mentioned here is Hearts, Minutes, and Doctor's Oath, another mobile game that I worked on for a long time, and that has a lot of dialogue, a lot of animation, but again, no voice acting. Um, Next to writing and designing for games and theater, I do a lot of story development and advice and coaching. Like I mentioned, a lot for especially the interactivity. So I'm currently working with a film director who is doing a interactive production, for instance. I do a lot of advising on branching narratives, stuff like that. I'm an advisor for the Flemish Game Fund. That's for Belgium. I am myself from Amsterdam, the Netherlands, but Belgium has the same language, and that's why they can use me as an advisor. I'm a programmer for the Imagine Film Festival, based on sci-fi, horror, fantasy every year in Amsterdam. And I am co-host of a podcast about Nirvana, the band, and an improv actor. So yeah, that's the things that I usually do. So enough about that. Yeah, at first, writing voice scripts. I already mentioned I came from a background in film, TV, and theater. Actors, working with actors all the time, working for actors, um, always thinking about when you're writing, like, how will somebody say that? Hearing their voices in your heads. That was just the basic thing for me. So I was always used to that. And until I started writing for video games without spoken words, I hadn't realized how big of a thing that was for me in the way that I wrote and how much it had formed my way of dialogue writing. So think about it. When you write for an actor, when you write dialogue that you know is going to be spoken, there's a lot that will be added to it. There's speech patterns, like how does somebody speak? Do they speak like fast or slow? Do they use a lot of words, or do they make like really short sentences? Then you have dialects and accents. So does somebody have like a local dialect? Do they have an accent like I have, speaking English, although it's not my mother language? All of those things you can think about while writing your dialogue and give it as a characteristic of the character that will then be played by the actor. Or the other way around, you cast an actor that has one of those characteristics, and they just bring it to what you already wrote. Then there's the thing about pacing. The pacing of your dialogue is basically, when you're working with actors, the way they speak it. And the way that they speak it is the way that your audience will get it. So when I'm talking to you, you are hearing everything I say at the same pace. So whether like if there's two of you at this moment sitting in front of your computer listening to me, you will both hear the same words at the same time. There is no delay. But when you're reading something, there is a delay. So whether it's books or comics or whatever, the person sitting next to you will never read at the exact same pace as you read. So the way that the dialogue gets through their heads is a different pace. When you're writing for actors, you can decide the pace as a writer, as an actor. You decide at what pace your work arrives at the viewer or listener or player. If you don't have the actor speaking, if you just have words on paper, you can't really influence the pacing. Jokes and irony, that's the next one. Another one that's really important. When you are writing for actors, you know they can use the sound of their voice to get jokes to land. and to get irony to work. Um, Jokes, I think we all know it. If you have like a great joke, but you're bad at telling jokes, it will never land. And the other way around, if you are somebody who is really good at delivering jokes, you can get a mediocre joke to work quite well. Um, Same goes for irony. I think we all know the examples of sending somebody an email or a text message or whatever, and then the other person being confused or even feeling like attacked by you. And then what we usually do is like use emojis. So like put a winky face so people know for sure that it's a joke or it's irony. Um, that's the extra that you have to do when you don't have the voice. So if you can't hear the actor speak, sometimes you might not know whether something is a joke or irony unless you change the words. Something we'll get to later. And the final thing that I wanted to mention is really important for writing voice scripts is overlapping dialogue. This has to do slightly with the whole pacing issue. So the way that people overlap their sentences is also pacing, but it also gives an urgency. So, for instance, when you have two characters and one is just carrying on and the other one is just breaking them mid sentence and are being like, no, 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 stop, stop, or something special happens and somebody has like a sentence and all of a sudden in the middle of the sentence, like, "Ah," like that. Um, you do that with your voice. So you overlap or you cut a dialogue short. That's also really hard to do when you don't have the voices. Um, these are all things that now make total sense to me, but they weren't things that I realized when I started writing game dialogue that would not have any actors. And that's the first thing I did when I went into games. By now, I've written both voiced and non voiced games. So I have experience with both. But the first couple of things I wrote in game design were without the actors. And that was, I guess, a bit of a shock because these things that I'm telling you now, like these are like specific for voices. Um, like I said, I hadn't really realized before that. So yeah, and then I went into writing for non-voiced games, and to make sure that this explanation is as clear as it can be, I have taken out 3 different game types that are non-voiced because that makes it easier to explain what I mean. Obviously, there are a lot of other games that will probably have no voice, or maybe they have like the games where you have characters that will just say or or something like that as a reaction, but then the lines they're speaking are still not voiced. There are lots of different examples of that. But what I want to do in this lecture is focus on 3 different non-voiced game types that are often found in mobile gaming and are always story-driven because that's basically what we're talking about, like games that have heavy dialogue, that have a lot of story to tell, and that have a lot of characters that need to tell that story. And also games that have a lot of visuals and because of that are slightly reminiscent of comics. So again, there are different other game types that have dialogue but no voice. But for the sake of this lecture, I'm sticking to these 3. So the 3 ones that I'm using here are, the first one is animated cutscenes with speech balloons. So that's the image you see on the top right. That's an image from the Criminal Minds game. As you can see, there are characters there, and they basically have a speech balloon every time that they talk. And those cutscenes are animated. So you see just a static image now. I will show you a cutscene from a game like this later on. So it will be animated, basically. Then you have the second one that I described. I'm just calling it mobile hybrid. That have dialogues through static character emotion images. So that's the one you see below the Criminal Minds. This is an image from a game called Solitaire Mystery, which I worked on as well quite recently. And this is your, let's say, basic mobile game that is story driven, where you have characters and you have the dialogue of those characters, but they are not in a scene. They're in separate static scenes, but their visuals can change. So basically, this character that you see here, her name's Casey. She works for the police. She's now looking quite serious. She has her arms like that. But as soon as you tap the screen and you get a second clause from her or from the guy she's talking with, her image will change. So basically, every time you see an image of her with a facial and a bodily expression that fits what she is talking about. And then the third one is basically a visual novel, dialogues through static images. The image here is from a game, If My Heart Had Wings. Not one I worked on, but it's a good example, so that's why I put it in. And that's basically, again, having those dialogue lines somewhere on the lower half of the screen, and then it being supported by images that are representative for the scene or the moment or the character, but they're not like specific images of that character speaking about that specific thing, like in the previous Solitaire Mystery example. So it's more like an open way of showing visuals and not just related literally to the person who is speaking. Okay, so those are the three non-voiced game types that I will be referencing throughout this lecture. So what works? Help. Yeah, so like I was saying, I started working on video games. I started writing video games. I had a lot of really useful baggage from my experience in film and TV and theater. And obviously my experience as a game consumer. So that all sort of went quite well, but there were a couple of things that didn't work. The jokes fell flat. That was like a really big issue. The game that I was working on at that moment was a really jokey game. And I really like writing jokes and humor and stuff like that. But a lot of jokes fell flat as soon as they became implemented in the game. So when I wrote them on the page, I heard them in my head. I heard the characters speaking those jokes. And then when they were implemented in the game, they didn't work. Even I wasn't laughing anymore, even though I did like the joke. So yeah, that didn't work. The pacing was totally off. The games that I started working on, the first couple I wrote were like the example I just showed of Criminal Minds, and also the example that you see right here from Hearts Medicine's Doctor's Oath. This is an image from the tutorial at the beginning. Do you need some instructions? Yes, I did need them. So I worked with basic cutscenes that have like simple animations and the speech balloons. And then the pacing was off because, like I said, I couldn't influence the pace with what the players would read it. And also, games like this have, although they have animations, you still need to tap because the animations are like separate parts of animation. So every time you have two or three clauses of people speaking, like by the way, if you have no idea what I'm talking about, a clause is like one part of somebody saying something before somebody else starts talking. So one or two or three lines from me would be a clause until the next person starts speaking. So that's basically what also fits into one of the text balloons. So you'd have a couple of clauses animated, and then you have that whole tap to continue. And you probably know that if you've played games like that, as a player, you have to tap, which makes sense because it's just like reading. You need to read what's on the screen, and then once you've read it, you can tap and you can continue. And that's a really nice way to make sure that players are able to get the entire story, because you don't want it to go too fast and they miss out because they don't hear it, they can only read it. But that meant that the pacing that I felt for the story was totally off. So I had to start thinking about the pace that players would use. And because that pace would be different for everybody, I couldn't rely on, let's say, the internal pacing of the storylines that I would have. It would have to be a sort of a one size fits all pacing. Um, Emotions. The emotions are not optimal and they're one dimensional. Please bear in mind that I am exaggerating and definitely do not want to be dismissive of drawings, animations, and stuff like that. Um, don't worry, because I'll be singing the praise of comics later on. But just for the sake of the argument of what I was feeling at that moment, if you're used to working with actors who can convey their emotions with just one sentence, or even not just one sentence, but with the way that their facial expressions go, um, it's quite a big step to go from that to what you're seeing here, with animated emotions, with images, visual images that are less rich than a full-blown human person. So that's something that I had to work with as well and had to adjust to. And like I said, I might call it here one-dimensional, but the interesting thing is that that's actually harder to work for, because I realized I'd had it easy with writing for actors, because just with the jokes, like an actor can say almost everything. They can even try and add emotion if it's not in your lines. They can add like facial expressions to something that might be really flat, and you can read something that's really boring, and have like a great actor read it to you, and then it sort of makes sense. Um, so I was sort of reliant on actors doing that and elevating your work. And now I had to basically rely on myself, and also myself instructing the artist a bit more, and them inspiring me um, one step ahead of what I would be used to with actors. And the last one is unnatural speech patterns. This again has to do with the pacing, as well as just speech patterns in normal situations. Because if people speak, they can have like sentences that don't go anywhere, sentences that trail off. Like for instance, I mean, I'm telling you a lot of things, but I'm not reading it from a piece of paper. So I start a sentence, I know what I'm going to say, but sometimes I will have to think, or maybe I have a sentence that just trails off somewhere. That's all natural, and when you write, especially for film, that's something that you tend to do. But that can be really unnatural if you put it on paper. So there's a big difference between the written dialogue and the spoken dialogue, which is also why often, like for instance, when you do, if you have a book and you make it into a film, you will have to change some of the dialogues. Not with every writer. Some writers are you can just take it literally and just read the book and it will be fine. But in general, there's a real difference in speech patterns on the page or when you're speaking it as an actor. So yeah, this is what happened to me, and so I started out writing that, and I was sort of half happy, and the other half was like, "What's happening here? Why isn't this working?" And most importantly, what do I have to do to make this work? What can I do to start improving on this? And that's when we got to the solution, and the solution was comics, obviously. I say that now because it's now so logical, but back then I didn't really realize that. Um, Let me tell you how I came to this. I think I've always been a comic reader, so that wasn't like a far fetch for me. Same with just regular books, and obviously you know that when you realize you're going to write for the paper rather than for the spoken word, you will have to refer to words on paper, so books, whatever. Um, but because the first things that I was writing had animated sequences in them, like animated cutscenes, um, at first I thought, well, maybe I have to look into like animations, like look more at animated movies and stuff like that. But they also have voice, so it's interesting to learn about the pacing of animation works and stuff like that. But it didn't really help me for the writing. Um, and then I sort of realized that comics were the way to go. And the two images that you see here are from the comic Kill or Be Killed by Brubaker and Phillips. I'm sure some of you have heard of them as writer artists, usually work together, sometimes not, but they have written a lot of crime work. And when I started working on the Criminal Minds game, this was my birthday present from the studio I was working for at that moment. They gave me Kill or Be Killed. And basically, well, obviously because I would enjoy it, it was a birthday present after all, but also because it would hopefully help me and inspire me in writing the Criminal Minds game. Because yeah, it's crime, but it's also words on the page and speech balloons. Um, and this really helped me. It helped me so much that I started to go back to other comics I read before, and it made me appreciate the comics a lot more as well, which is something that I am really happy about because I always did appreciate comics. I read them, I like them, but now I started to look at them in a different light. So I really started to look into how do you spread your dialogue? How do you spread your information? Um, what are the choices that you make when you only have a couple of panels, when you have a limitation in what you can draw, when you have a limitation in how much words you can put on the page, and how much word you can put in the speech balloons. And also, what are ways to creatively deal with those limitations? Um, because that was also something that I had to deal with. Having those limitations also in cutscenes, in the amount of room that you have, because let's not forget, when we're talking about game development, there are also rules as to how much a player will want to read. Even if you have like a game that is narratively driven, your players are still going to get bored after a while, um, unless you are really a hardcore visual novel lover. You will want to eventually get to gameplay. Um, so you have that to deal with as well as a writer. Like, how much can I cram into this before the action starts again? And that was also something that I started to learn from really getting into comics and looking at them and the way they work. Well, obviously, when you're here and hearing me speak about this, I am pretty sure that I don't have to explain to you all of the possibilities you have in comics. These two images already show you a lot of possibilities in the pacing, in the storytelling, in how to choose your panels. So I'm definitely not gonna go into detail on that. I'm just gonna go into detail about how it helped me. So, oh, yep, that sound has to go off. Yeah. So I was just mentioning already that I was working at first in games that have animated scenes. So I mentioned three types of games at the beginning. Games with animated cutscenes that have speech balloons, games without animated cutscenes that have speech balloons, and the visual novel type where you don't have speech balloons but just dialogue, text, and images. Um, and Like I already mentioned, I first thought like I have to look into animation a bit more. And then I realized no, because there's still no voices. But also animated game scenes are not like animation. Why? Because talking about mobile games, indie games, stuff like that, the animation isn't going to be extremely detailed. And also the animation is going to be um, useful. And what I mean by that is not that it's not going to be pretty or fun, or whatever, but like I mentioned, in game design, you always have to think about the player, you always have to think about the action, you always have to think about what is functional. So that means that there might be a real difference in the way that you show your animations, and that there's also limitations to that. So often animated game scenes, when we're talking about this kind of game, obviously there are a lot of other animated cutscenes in different games, but speaking about this specific type of often mobile game, you can see that the animations are not that elaborate. So it's different from animation. And to me, even though they're animated, it's more alike to comics, just two-dimensional, not moving comics. And I want to show you a short scene from Hearts, Medicine, Doctor's Oath that will hopefully illustrate why I think that comics are more relatable to this than regular animation. Okay, so that was a scene from Hearts Medicine's Doctor's Oath. You can get that in the App Store. It's been out for a couple of years now. It's a hospital game, and as you can see, this was a moment between two doctors. One of them has a trauma related to drugs, and the other one is trying to help him. The reason I wanted to show this is there are a lot of constraints, like I mentioned, in doing animations like this. As you can see, the background is static because that's also a gameplay background. There are no possibilities, or let's say limited, in this scene you can't see it, but sometimes you can a bit, limited possibilities to zoom in. And the animations are quite static, although you can see like somebody can drop a book and they can walk off. So it's more possibility than just having that static image moving and then having the text. But it's not Disney animation either. For me, the reason why it helped to think in comic style about this is thinking about separate panels. So instead of thinking of this whole scene as one animated scene or one live action scene or one scene that is what you would see in the theater maybe, I started thinking about scenes like this as several pages of a comic, and then the panels within there. So I mentioned before, like the clauses, like every text balloon is a clause. You can see here, also talking about pacing, that every time you have tap to continue in the bottom, and I will show a little bit of the clip again after I've explained this, just so you can realize that. It says tap to continue at the bottom. So I decided to think of every unit before the tap to continue as a panel, as a comics panel. And even though you can't really change the angle, so you can't like zoom in on a face or put the virtual camera somewhere else, thinking about it like that does help you focus on something. So for instance, you have two people speaking to each other. You basically, you can have two speech balloons, one after the other, before the tap to continue comes. But sometimes, even though somebody else is going to react, you only want one of them to talk instead of both of them, one after the other. So think of it like panels, like two people are talking in one panel, and then in the next panel, one of those characters will say something that is really meaningful, and the other one will react to that. Then most likely you will put that one meaningful sentence in that one panel and maybe zoom in on that character and just show his or her face or their face, and put a text balloon there, and then move on to the next panel and then show the other character reacting to that. That's the way I started thinking about how to write this. And obviously, the pacing of that and the tap to continue is also being done by the animator who implements all of this. So it's a back and forth between that. But that is something that really helped me. And I just want to show you just a little bit again, just to illustrate this. So yeah, this is one. So she's tap to continue. This is an action. He reacts. Tap to continue because we're upping the pace. Shivering. Again, tapping before he says something, which is a different panel altogether. Okay, I hope that explains a bit about how I started using comics for scenes like this. Continuing on to speak a bit more about this, and obviously there's a lot to talk about, but we're nearing the end of my lecture. So I'm just gonna go into a couple of things that I already mentioned or want to explain to you. Yeah, the similarities, because I started out with the differences between non-voiced games and film. And then I found the similarities between non-voiced games and comics. So I wanted to just put a lot of those things out there for you to hopefully help you. Like I said, every clause or clause combination is a panel. This is basically what I was just explaining to you about how I started to look at those little parts of it. And don't forget, I just showed you a animated scene, but it also works for the non-animated scenes, because if you look at these two images at the bottom, the left one is from a lovely game called Delicious World, made by Gamehouse Barcelona, also a mobile game that I sometimes help out on. It's images, slightly animated with text balloons on the bottom. This is just one panel, basically. And we can see all of the expressions, and we can see who is talking and what she's saying. The background in this case is blurred, which I think is a nice detail that gives depth to it. Looking at the right side, that's an image from Chew, the comic book. Chew is amazing. If you don't know it, go and read it. It's funny. It's well written. It's well drawn. It's great. And there you can see on the right side, that's basically the same idea. It's a panel. There's one person saying something. You get what's happening from the background. You get what he's meaning, what he's feeling, and what's happened. Obviously, there is a lot of detail in there that you can't see on the left side in Delicious World. We'll get to that a bit later as well. But you can understand why I am trying to see every clause as a panel in comics. The pace is set by the player reader. That's also something that I think I already discussed enough. Player reader decides when they've read enough and continue to the next panel. So please make sure that the pacing of what you're writing is general, and that the thing that you're trying to say or explain isn't reliant on the pacing of an actor. Limited room for dialogue, also something I just explained already. There's just not enough room in one panel image. And I think that's also something that I've realized more and more, because in games, if you decide that every clause is a panel, you will be able to write more economically, because as a dialogue writer, sometimes you can just trail off because people are being like funny and nice and having like back and forth, and then your scene can become really big. And it might be a great scene, but it's probably going to be too much for your video game. And the same is true for comics. Comics have this specific ability of having their pacing throughout the pages, and you can't have too many pages of comics because the pacing will be off. If it's just drawn out too long, it's not going to be interesting anymore. It's not going to be interesting to read, but also not to look at, because then a lot of panels will stay the same. So limited room for dialogue, which is a great thing, because you need to be really sharp. Less different in backgrounds. This is a similarity and also a difference between games and comics, because there is less difference in backgrounds when you compare it to movies, for instance, because in movies, you have that camera and you can just follow actors around. And if you follow them around, you can see like the whole room that they're in. That doesn't happen in comics, and usually it doesn't happen in games unless you're like a AAA game and you have motion capture and actors moving around everywhere. We're not talking about that because then you also have spoken words. Um, but usually in games, there is even less difference in backgrounds than in comics. And that's what the last part that I mentioned here is about: less freedom in images. I mentioned big, small panels because that's freedom in images, but um, there's also the limitations of that. Because in games, you will have backgrounds that often have to be reused. Because especially in mobile games, you will have levels that have to be played and replayed and replayed, and you can't make a background for every new thing. Think of, in this case, animation, like the traditional cell animations. You have that background, you put something in front of it. That's what works for games like this, Delicious World. You can see the background, you can see the characters in front, but the characters in the front will change and the background will stay the same. Looking at that image from Chew on the other side, that background is a one-off, obviously. This is middle of the action, something has happened, a lot of people there either dead, injured, whatever. There's a lot of things that you can make out from that background. And most likely, this will be the only time you see the background like that. Sometimes you see a background used twice, three times, but usually not. That's because there's, let's say, less to draw and to copy. So that's a difference between the games and the comics. In general, though, the similarity is that you have that less different in backgrounds because you can't move around, because you have the 2D effect, and less freedom in images. You can do the bigger and the smaller panels. You can maybe in comics do like a one page, one image. But that also has a small limitation, and that limitation is even bigger when you are working in games like the ones that I've mentioned here. So comics can help you in looking at the way that you can use a panel, that you can use a smaller image, and the things you can do in there. Just beware that most likely there are edge cases where you can do something in the comic, but you still can't do it in the game. It's going to be even more restricted. But that's good because you're getting steps down from film to comics to games, basically. Differences. This is the last thing I'll be talking to you about, and I think we mentioned a couple of them already. Again, disclaimer, there are exceptions. Less background detail in games is what I just mentioned. More emphasis on facial expression in games. This is one of the things where games and animation, like film animation, digital animation, is a bit more similar. Because you have the facial expressions that are being used and reused, and they're more outspoken often than in a lot of comics, because you have less room for subtlety, because those backgrounds are mainly more static. The image that you see here on the right is also from Delicious World by Gamehouse Barcelona. These were drawn by the wonderful artist Lisana. And for every new character they make images like this. Some of you will probably recognize this idea from animation movies as well. Just to have those different facial expressions. And basically, for instance, for a game like this, when I would write a dialogue for this character, these are the facial expressions I can use. So there's even less room for subtlety than in comics, where basically as a writer, you will write a dialogue and you will write an emotion. And then your artist will be able to draw an expression on the face that fits it, or obviously you do that in discussing it with each other, but there will be more tailor-made facial expressions. Um, that might be nicer and easier, but my experience is that I sort of like when dialogue writing to also have this restriction. Obviously not for all games. This is just one specific example. But the nice thing about having these restrictions is that you tend to focus your dialogues a bit more, because you know these are the expressions that I have. So how do I make sure that what the person says fits one of those facial expressions exactly? And this is sort of the same like what I was mentioning about writing jokes and writing irony and stuff like that. If you want your lines to be exactly understood by the player, you need to make their meaning as clear as possible. Doesn't mean you can't be subtle, but it needs to be clear. And working with facial images like this can really help sometimes to make your dialogue more clear. Other differences, no combination between dialogue and description. So where in comics you can have like a description line and then also a text balloon and dialogue, you usually won't have that in games. You might have it sometimes when you're in like tutorials, stuff like that. Again, there are exceptions, but in general, you will not have that combination quite often, where in comics you can do that a lot if you want to. Game dialogues always lead to interactivity. That's something that I already mentioned as well. It's always everything you write, even if you are writing a really narrative-driven game, it's always about the interactivity. It's always about what the player eventually needs to do. Even in hardcore graphic novels, there will be some kind of choice you have to make, or at least you have to tap something or whatever. So you're always leading to interactivity, which is really different from comics. It's a whole different area to talk about, so I'll leave it at that, but that's definitely a difference. And yeah, last one, experiments cost money. So basically where in comics you can draw one panel and make something really weird because it's just one panel or just one page. When you do that for a game, it's probably not going to work because it's going to cost a lot of money. You can't just do one drawing and never use it again. There's a lot of money involved in making games, even if you make small games, if you make indie games, if you make mobile games. So having just one visual experiment is probably going to cost a lot of money. You saw it in the video I showed of Heart's Medicine, where the character who has this trauma about drug abuse has like, he remembers something that happened to him. Well, what they did is basically superimpose that moment in a sort of a blurry thing on the foreground. It looks quite okay. And that's the easiest and cheapest way to do it. If you want to have like real, it could have been like a beautiful image of the way that he's thinking about it and how it looks in his mind or whatever. But often it will be like, yeah, is it just for one image? Okay, we're not doing it because it costs too much money, unfortunately. So you have a lot of more room in comics to just have fun and experiment with a panel or a page. And that's it. We're at the end of my lecture. There's lots more to tell about this subject. I hope that this has well, informed you a bit about my personal journey going from writing for voiced work, film, TV, theater, then going into games and having to work for games that don't have voice. Like I already mentioned, I obviously worked for voice games as well. I even did a full audio game that just had voices and no images at all. So I've become pretty all-round in that as well. But this was my first experience in game writing back when I started. And I think that to me, I'm really I'm grateful that that was my first experience, because it really forced me to think more about how you write and how you write for images. And it made me appreciate comics in a whole different way, in a light that I'd never imagined, to the point that I'd love to write for a comic one time. So maybe that will happen in the future. Thank you very much for listening to this, watching this. If you have any questions, notes, whatever, please contact me. There's information on the screen on how you can reach me. Feel free to do so. I'm always happy to answer questions or get into a debate on any of the subject I've mentioned here, or help you out if you're struggling with something. Again, thank you very much for listening, and maybe we will meet again sometime in the future, digitally or in real life. Thank you again.
Bombing, a Graffiti Sandbox, is an independent, lo-fi graffiti sandbox game where every inch of the environment can be used as a canvas. Armed with your trusty backpack, a palette of paint cans and pens, and a selection of tools, take to the streets and fill them with your creations. Bombing features several levels to explore and paint on, licensed music by independent artists, and ambient environments to help you get lost in your creations. It's inspired by real experiences creating urban art. It's just you, alone in a world with your tools to create whatever you want. Your basic toolkit is your trusty spray cans. They're available in multiple colors and have a range of caps which affect the flow of your paint for different situations. In addition to cans, you've got pens too. Finer than spray cans, they allow for better control and are best for quick tags and sketching out your concepts. Before finalizing them, and that's what you can expect from Bombing, a graffiti sandbox. Coming to Steam and itch.io when it's ready.
Hey everyone! Thanks so much for joining us today. We hope you're having a good time with us for Comics X Games 2021. We are done for today, but we will be back throughout the week of May 8th to 15th. Check out our website at handaisociety.com for our full schedule and follow us at Hand Eye Society for live updates. See ya!